Welcome back to Architecture Topics. I'm your host, Liam Caron, and today we travel to St. Louis, Missouri, to the banks of the Mississippi River. Here rises one of the most striking silhouettes in the United States, a 630-foot stainless steel arc bending across the sky. That is 192 meters. The Gateway Arch. It is the tallest monument in the United States and a powerful symbol of America's westward expansion. But before we dive into its story, I want to ask you something. Doing these episodes feels a bit like talking to an audience I can't see, but that I would love to get to know better. So what I would like to ask from you is that you press pause right now and leave a comment on whichever platform you are listening on, and tell me a little bit more about yourself. Where are you from? Are you a student? A professional? Simply an architecture enthusiast? Is this your first episode? Or are you a regular listener? Whatever you want to share, I would love to read. And I promise I'll reply to every single one of your comments. Let's start a conversation. Okay, great. I'm genuinely excited to read your comments. But right now, let's get back to the episode. The 1930s were a time when St. Louis felt it was slipping into obscurity. Once a bustling hub for trade and industry, the city wanted to reclaim its place in the national imagination. And so came the plan. Build a monument to celebrate the role of St. Louis in America's expansion westward, and to honor Thomas Jefferson's vision of exploration. This was conceived as part of a larger project, the Jefferson National Expansion Memorial, which aimed to transform the city's riverfront into a grand public space. The idea was ambitious, but for decades, it remained just that, an idea. First came the Great Depression, then World War II. Events kept delaying everything. It wasn't until the post-war years, in 1947, that momentum returned. In 1947, the Jefferson National Expansion Memorial Association, working with the National Park Service, launched a design competition to imagine what this monument could actually look like. The competition drew more than 170 entries from across the country. The brief was open-ended, but ambitious. Design a monument that would capture the spirit of America's westward expansion, while also revitalizing a neglected stretch of riverfront in St. Louis. Among the participants was a young architect, almost unknown at the time, Eero Saarinen. He did have some experience, though. But working at his dad's firm, he had always been in the shadow of his father, Eero Saarinen. In fact, both father and son submitted entries to this competition. Eero Saarinen was already a respected name, known for his work in Finland and later in the United States. Eero, on the other hand, was 37 years old, talented, but he still hadn't made a name for himself. When the jury opened the envelopes and studied the models, one vision caught their attention. A pure stainless steel arch, soaring 192 meters into the air. Simple, abstract, and yet instantly powerful. It wasn't a literal wagon wheel or a statue of pioneers. It was geometry elevated to poetry. But don't let the simplicity of the geometry fool you. At 630 feet, or 192 meters, the Gateway Arch is taller than the Washington Monument in D.C., or the Space Needle in Seattle. It stands about half as tall as the Empire State Building, and roughly 3/4 the height of 30 Rockefeller Plaza. It is massive. At first, some jurors hesitated. Could something so minimal really embody such a grand narrative? But the more they looked, the more they realized it was a symbol that transcended literal imagery. And when the winner was announced, it wasn't Eero. It was Eero. Many were confused when they saw the results. Some even thought there had been a mistake. Saarinen was a known and respected name. But Eero? Who even was that? Eero himself would pass away just 2 years later, in 1950, never knowing that his son's boldest design would one day reshape the St. Louis skyline. But winning the competition was only the beginning. Turning the arch from paper into reality would take nearly 2 decades, and the path was anything but smooth. Almost immediately, opposition surfaced. Some locals thought the design was too abstract, too modern, not at all what a monument to westward expansion should look like, while politicians questioned whether the project was worth the cost. And cost was no small matter. The United States was heading into the Korean War and later the Cold War. Funding a massive stainless steel monument on the banks of the Mississippi did not always seem like a national priority. So, year after year, the project was delayed. Land had to be cleared. Entire blocks of historic warehouses and businesses were demolished to make room for the park. In total, more than 40 city blocks from the oldest part of St. Louis were razed in what officials called slum clearance. Thousands of residents and business owners were displaced. Officials saw it as the cost of progress, but many critics now say it erased vibrant neighborhoods, and that the promised progress never really came. Back then, lawsuits were filed, citizens protested, and by the mid-1950s, many wondered if the arch would ever actually rise. For Eero Saarinen, these were frustrating years. He had won the competition in 1948, but through the 1950s, the design sat dormant, waiting for its chance. In the meantime, his career blossomed with other projects. The TWA Flight Center at JFK Airport, the General Motors Technical Center in Michigan, and university campuses across the country. Yet the arch, his boldest vision, remained unrealized. Then in 1961, tragedy struck. Eero Saarinen died unexpectedly during surgery for a brain tumor. He was only 51 years old. He would never live to see his gateway arch built. After Saarinen's death, in 1961, the fate of the project once again seemed uncertain. Without its author to defend it, some feared the arch would remain forever unbuilt. But his colleagues at Saarinen's office, along with the engineers at Severid Associates, carried the project forward with determination. Among them were structural engineer Hans Carl Bandel and project engineer John Dinkeloo, both central to transforming Saarinen's vision into reality. Bandel had helped define the arch's structural form back in the competition stage, while Dinkeloo oversaw the complex logistics of construction after Saarinen's death. Finally, in 1963, more than 15 years after the competition, construction began, but engineering wasn't the only challenge. In 1964, civil rights activist Percy Green climbed the unfinished arch to protest the exclusion of black workers from union jobs. His act of protest drew national attention, forcing negotiations that led to reforms in hiring for federally funded projects. The arch, meant to symbolize expansion and freedom, suddenly became a stage for the civil rights struggle of its own time. But back to the construction. Building an arch of this scale had never been done before. The structure was designed as 2 giant legs of stainless steel triangles, narrowing as they rose, and meeting at the top in a perfect catenary curve. This weighted catenary curve is the ideal shape for an arch that supports only its own weight. It allows the structure to resist pure compression with almost no bending forces, making it both elegant and extraordinarily stable. From the outside, the arch was clad in stainless steel panels that gave it its pure, seamless appearance. Inside, hidden from view, was a skeleton of carbon steel and concrete. Each leg was built independently, inch by inch, until they finally met at the top, closing the arch. The process was slow, meticulous, and dangerous. As the legs rose higher, engineers constantly measured their alignment, knowing that even a few inches of error could make it impossible to connect them at the top. On October 28th, 1965, after 2 years of construction, the final piece was lifted into place. With enormous precision, the two sides of the arch met in the middle, locking into their iconic curve. In that moment, the two halves of Saarinen's vision finally touched, transforming years of drawings, delays, and uncertainty into a single continuous curve of steel. A curve that, on windy days, can sway up to 18 inches at the top. For St. Louis, it was a moment of triumph. The skyline now had a new crown, a symbol not only of the city's past, but of its determination to claim a place in America's future. At first, not everyone embraced the arch. Some critics dismissed it as a piece of abstract sculpture, too minimal to carry the weight of history, they said, while others complained about the enormous cost. More than $13 million at the time, which would translate to somewhere between $130 and $140 million in today's money. But as the years passed, the doubts faded. The public grew to love the arch, not for what it literally represented, but for what it evoked. It became a symbol open to interpretation, of exploration, of ambition, of modernity itself. And visitors who stepped inside discovered another surprise. Saarinen had envisioned a tram system to carry passengers through the hollow legs to an observation deck at the very top. The lift system itself was engineered by Richard Bowser, a young elevator specialist from Missouri. In just 2 weeks, Bowser devised a mechanism that could rotate as it climbed, keeping passengers upright while following the curve of the arch. From the observation deck, you could look east across the Mississippi into Illinois or west over the city of St. Louis. It was a view unlike any other, framed by one of the boldest monuments of the 20th century. Over time, the Gateway Arch became inseparable from the identity of St. Louis. Just as the Eiffel Tower defines Paris, or the Statue of Liberty defines New York, the arch gave St. Louis a silhouette recognized around the world. And yet, it also stands as a monument to Eero Saarinen himself, a man who did not live to see it rise, but whose vision, against all odds, transformed the city and left behind one of the most daring works of modern architecture. The arch was declared a National Historic Landmark in 1987, cementing its place among the country's most treasured monuments. And decades later, in 2018, it was renamed as the Gateway Arch National Park, giving it the same status as some of the country's most cherished landscapes. This new designation coincided with the completion of the renewal of the grounds around the arch. A new museum opened beneath it, telling the story not only of westward expansion, but also of the long struggle to build the monument itself. The 5-year renovation cost around $380 million, nearly 30 times the original budget of the 1960s, and completely reimagined the landscape, reconnecting the arch grounds with the city's downtown. Today, more than 2 million people visit every year. Some come for the view, others for the history, but they all leave with the memory of standing beneath a structure that feels at once impossibly simple and unimaginably large. The Gateway Arch is not just a monument to the pioneers who crossed the Mississippi. It is a monument to vision, to persistence, and to the power of a single elegant idea. And above all, it is the monument that defined Eero Saarinen's career. An architect who, in one single curve of steel, left behind one of the most enduring icons of modern architecture. And that's it for today's story. Thank you for listening to Architecture Topics. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to follow the podcast on your favorite platform so you don't miss the next one. I'm Liam Caron, and I'll see you next time with another chapter in the history of architecture. Until then, keep looking up.